Hey, Steve Saretsky here. I just put together a new post on my website. It's called House of Debt. You can check out in the description below. I put that there. It basically just references this book, House of Debt. It's been referenced a lot in recent interviews by the CEO of CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, Evan Siddall. He's referenced this book, and actually all these new lending policies that the Canadian government has been instituting are pretty much already in this book. They've already talked about them, so you know that this book is obviously important. It kind of gives you an inside look into maybe what the government is thinking, what CMHC is thinking, what the Bank of Canada is thinking, because they seem to be taking a lot out of the playbook here. So I went and picked it up, and Evan Siddall, the CEO of CMHC, has been very critical of the current situation in Canada, obviously with being a high private household debt in Canada. It's the highest of any country in the G7. And that correlates with high home prices. And of course, that ultimately leads to financial crisis. So what Evan has quoted in the Globe and Mail is a direct quote. He actually quoted this book. He said, and the book reads, "Economic disasters are almost always preceded by a large increase in household debt. In fact, the correlation is so robust that it is as close to an empirical law as it gets in macroeconomics." So basically what they try to say is household debt is automatically fuels higher house prices, which in turn leads to financial crises. So basically, they give an example in the book. Back in the United States, they said the areas that went up the most in value and then dropped the most in value were the areas with low credit scores. So that was areas like Detroit and Chicago. What happens is these people don't have any money, but they all want to get into the housing boom. So what happens is credit becomes easily available. Banks are happy to lend. They're lending to anyone. And then as the credit starts fueling the market, prices start to go up. Banks are even more comfortable to lend to more and more people because all they see is prices going up. They just feel like prices are going to go up forever and ever and ever, similar to what we saw here in Vancouver. Lenders are happy to lend. Prices can only go up. So that's exactly what happened in Chicago and Detroit. And of course, these people are the most leveraged. They really don't have any equity in their homes, just all paper gains. So as soon as the crash came, there's an immediate restriction in the amount of credit being out. Banks stopped lending. Credit comes out, and you see a huge housing correction. And those are the area that had the most foreclosures. Because again, like I said, these people are extremely leveraged. They really don't have any equity in their loans. It's all just cheap credit-fueled debt. So basically, what happens is they say, okay, well, you need to look at these low credit areas because those are the areas that are most vulnerable. So there's actually a coincidence that a report came out in the Vancouver Sun last week talking about private debt levels. Again, like I said before, Canadians are the most indebted of any G7 country. I think it's hitting almost $1. We owe $1.70 in debt for every dollar in income that we earn. So it's huge. It's way higher than the U.S. was back in their crisis. But anyways, so they say look at these areas, and this is a report in the Vancouver Sun that actually said the area of Newton, which is in Surrey, is actually the most indebted of any area in British Columbia. And so if I actually went back and looked, okay, I said, well, what have home prices done then? If this is the most, if this is low credit area, they're the most indebted already, what have home prices done? Well, home prices actually went up in Newton more than Vancouver, more than Burnaby, more than South Delta, a lot of the bigger areas or the more popular areas. Newton, which you wouldn't expect, detached prices went up 40% in 1 year. Townhouse prices 40% in 1 year. I think condos are around 18%, but there's so few of them that it's kind of hard to get a good read on. So you have a 40% gain in 1 year. Well, I mean, Newton, we know, is not a foreign investor area. I mean, I really don't think a foreign investor is pumping money into there. Local investor, again, highly doubt it. There might be a little bit of activity there, but for the most part, not. So it's the people that are buying these homes are almost certainly all locals. And we know that their incomes have not gone up 40% in a year. So how are they all going to service this debt? So Newton is like a prime example of everything that they talk about. The cheap credit goes out. People don't really have any money. It's a low credit area. They're already in debt. Credit comes up. It's easily available. Everybody wants to jump into the housing boom. They use cheap credit. They really don't have any equity in their homes. So as soon as there's a correction, these are areas that are hit hardest. And again, I've talked about it before. We've seen a correction. We're seeing a correction. It's really only begun just recently. I think detached, we've entered a buyer's market since August. Since that time, Newton detached prices have come down 20%. Again, that shows in the average and the median. That does not show in the benchmark because it lags so much. So these homeowners have just virtually lost 20% of their equity in Newton, but nobody knows. They don't know because it doesn't show up in the benchmark. People don't really follow it. This is a prime example. I think it's a worrisome scenario. That's why the CEO of CMHC has been so adamant about figuring out this debt problem and really tightening these lending restrictions. And as this cheap credit tightens, you're only going to see prices come down, because that's what in this book, that's what they stress, is really fuels home price growth and eventually recessions. So you have these losses in Newton already. Like I said, 20%. These are the areas, and if Newton is anything like its U.S. counterparts in Chicago, in Detroit, what they found in this book and their studies is that the average homeowner, per every dollar in home equity that they had, every dollar that their home went up in value, they borrowed 40 cents on the dollar in terms of they took out a home equity line of credit. So 40 cents on the dollar. So if this is what's happening in Newton prices, detached prices have gone up over the last year close about $150,000 to $200,000. So if hypothetically, if they're following the same pattern and they're borrowing 40 cents on the dollar, you're going to have a serious problem in Newton. Like I said, their debt level is already the highest in BC. And most of it is probably from credit cards and home equity lines of credit. How is this all going to get paid? It's not. The study actually shows that when these people actually go to take out the home equity lines of credit, they don't, even though they already have existing debt on their credit cards, they don't actually use that home equity line to pay down the debt, to pay off the credit cards. They actually end up going out and spending it. Usually that's on new cars, renovations in their home. So looking for that, that's House of Debt. Highly recommend this book. Again, there's some strong correlations. The CEO has referenced it of CMHC quite frequently. You can look at their lending policies that they're implementing right now. They're directly correlated to everything this book has been talking about. That some of the suggestions that the book makes is some of the stuff that the government is actually going ahead and implementing right now. It's some of the stuff that Evan Siddall there is actually trying to push for. He's trying to use some of these recommendations in the book. So they're fully aware of it. It gives you some really good insights. And again, like I said, you can see that in Newton is like the prime example. And, don't get me wrong, it's not just happening in Newton, it's happening everywhere else. But to actually have the data for Newton, to actually look at it as a case study, it's critical. Should give you a really good understanding of the market, basically what fuels these bubbles. And really some of my concerns moving forward, and that's why I'm not overly optimistic in terms of where is the market going to be over the next 6 months to 1 year, because until you can really get rid of the debt, you're going to have a problem on your hands. So, all right, thanks a lot.